So with most of my projects I always print out a template first, and here you can see me just marking off the inside depth by 2mm. That's just to allow for the depth of clay. Then I'll cut the whole thing out, including all the apertures. Then once I've cut everything out, I will start to assemble the card, just making sure those holes are properly cut through. But then we're ready to start assembling the outer shell. This is best done with super glue and a little bit of extra card here to make the shape of the fireplace. Need a bit of strengthener here, and just use a piece of card to put between the two gables. And then I need to get some extra card here for some roof pieces. Use some extra pieces of card for the lintels above the door and the windows. It's going to end up a bit fruitless. Now the paper clay I'm using here was a little bit old and took a lot of flattening down using a very heavy rolling pin, and then I just gradually stuck it down with some super glue over the whole of the shell. Required a little bit of work. I've cut out the hole for the windows here and for the lintels, which, as I said, is going to end up a little bit fruitless, but we'll come to that in a little while. So it took a while to get the clay on. When I did, I gave it a coat with some silver foil. Foil just adds as a little bit of a texture to give the walls some interest. Now here I'm just marking out the cornerstones, ready to start carving. A bit of cling film over the edge helps to protect the wet surface of the clay from pulling. And I'm just going to go through the whole building, carving the stonework. Did that really quickly. Now once it's set and dry, I can use an engraving tool to go back over the stonework. This is just to deepen the joints and make them more defined. Next I'm going to pay some attention to the windows, and to create the leaded effect I'm scratching into the surface of the acetate with the back of a scalpel over the top of a template. And in this very speeded up sequence I'll rub some dark grey paint into those grooves, and then when it's dry, rub it off. Here I've added some deeper windowsills and lintels which accounted for the depth of the clay, and I've also added some little shutters here. Next we're going to paint the walls with a basic coat of Vallejo middle stone. It's just a very thin coat of paint, but it's coating it all nicely. That paint to dry, we're just going to add some frames to these acetate sheets with the leading etched on. Just a little bit of white glue that'll hold it in place. I'm just applying that with a cocktail stick to eliminate the amount of glue seeping through. And now with that base coat dry, I just want to mark out where the dormer window position is going to be, and cutting a square hole just to get the position. Next I've taken some greys, browns and tan colours. I'm just going to go over the stonework, adding some different shades to give the stonework some contrast and some interest. Just gradually working my way up there. Then I'm going to give it a wash of brown, and finally a Nuln Oil black wash. And once that's all dry, I'm just going to scrape in some ready mix grout here. Now this was an experiment which ultimately didn't work, so I just did this little piece here, but then decided to give it up and try something else. As you can see, it's all smearing there, so what I did was just scrape off as much as I could, and then decided to try out using a technique using weathering powders, pigment powders. So I started going over with a range of greys and tan colours again, just brushing it all over the stonework. This actually helped with the slightly sticky, tacky nature of the wash that was left behind, and it also helped the pigment to adhere. As you can see, I'm just working it straight into the stone, and it's really producing a lovely effect with the pigment powders. Just working it gradually in layers from dark to light, and going back over and over and over it, just just slightly off screen there, nearly. But here I'm just cutting out the dormer window just to finish this segment off. Just roughly cut it out and cut those out, and I'll put those to one side to fit. Dormer window just goes in place there. And then the last thing to do in this little section is to shape the area over the eyebrow dormer. And what I did here was dip it into a bowl of PVA and water to soften it, and then just moulding it into shape, pressed it over that eyebrow dormer window and left that to set overnight. Once that was done, I could add the windows, and then cutting some little strips of card here, using it to create a door frame, little knocker made out of a jumper ring and some epoxy putty to make the little ornaments. Here I'm just scratching up the door made from a sheet of Foamex scored with lines to create the door frames, door panel pieces, and now I'm just going to paint it with a base coat of medium brown, along with the window frames which I did earlier. Now this section here, I actually forgot to film the making of the straw roof, so the very first few rows are missing. Here you can just see me adding more and more. These are made out of block brush fibres from a painter's and decorator's brush, and I'm just gluing it in layer after layer after layer to create a rough straw roof. I missed a lot of footage with this, but we can just get the overall effect of what I've done here. And the ridge pieces were just created by sticking a longer piece over the crest of the roof, folding it over and sticking it all down. It involved a lot of sticking my fingers with super glue, as these things tend to do. I then spent some time masking the walls and the windows up ready to paint the roof, and promptly lost all the footage of the painting. So here's a still showing what it all looked like after that painting. We started off with a straw colour, when various washes of black and brown, and then I finished it off with some moss from some ground sponge. Next I went through and detailed some extra mortar with some cream paint. Off camera I made up a baseboard out of some MDF and covered it with a layer of cork. I've also mounted into this a bulb section with a battery. And now I'm just going to build up some depth to the base using layers of cork, just to give it a bit of interest. We'll add some height at the back. Just building up lots of layers of cork. I could have used foam here, but I had some cork that I wanted to use, and it's going to enable me to stick trees into it later. So it's just a bit of an imprecise method of getting some height until you're happy with it. Some of the little offcuts can be later sprinkled on to create rocks. Just trim it to size and then shape it down to get a bit of a slope to the ground. Then cut some strips of Foamex to create some neater sides. Again, another camera mishap meant that I missed filming the base covering, but I've basically covered it in a mix of grout and soil from the garden dried in the oven, and a little bit of foam to give some depth. And now I'm going to coat it with PVA once that's all dry and set, ready to accept the static grass. The cocktail sticks are there to show me where the trees are going to go. So I just give the whole area a generous coating of PVA, and then I'm going to cover it with a base layer of 2mm static grass. Left out a little area for a path there, which once I shake the grass off will leave the path behind, as you can see there. And then I'm going to add another layer of 4mm grass. I'm using some cheap hairspray as a basing glue, and the grass will just stick on into that. showing there what the house looks like sat in the base. I've left a little socket there so I can eventually put an interior. Now these trees there are just for position only. What I'm going to use here is some hanging basket liner, which is made out of coconut fibre, to create some bramble basing. I always call it bracken, I mean bramble. And on top of that I'm just going to sprinkle some ground foam to create the illusion of leaves. Some more coconut fibre up the walls of the chimney breast, the chimney piece, and cover that with glue. And eventually I'm going to glue some more pieces of foam and leaf to create the idea of moss. Not moss, to create the idea of ivy. And a little bit more here to add some extra depth, where you'd get some moisture above the window there. Here I'm using some little bits of rope from my cat's scratching post that got pulled off. And I'm just going to glue some ground foam, greens and reds, yellows, and create the illusion of some flowers sticking onto the side of the wall there. And then I'm going to just add a few more to the side of the path there. Final stages, adding some depth to the colour with an airbrush. Here I'm just painting on some earth colours and then darkening some of the greens to mute it all down. Olive green and a little bright green to finish off with. Here I've just made some additional better trees with some sea foam. I won't go into it here, I'll create another video showing you better how to make them. But with the addition of some ground foam and then painted with various autumnal colours, we can create some nice looking trees. I've added a little bit of extra foam onto the ivy there, and then just a few finishing touches with paint. So these are the final trees going into position, and just little bits of extra colour. I've made a little witch's broomstick here, just propping it into place. That was made from another piece of rope from the scratching post and a little plastic rod tied with a piece of cotton. Next, I'm going to glue a tiny little skull onto the windowsill, just as an added spooky decoration. Just put a little bit of super glue underneath and I can stick it in place. And now for some final detailing with some handmade little pumpkins and some tiny little 3D printed cats, just to give it that extra little touch. Here we go with the kittens. And with that, my friends, we're finished. This is the final piece. Pretty happy with that overall. It's a very nice piece to do for the spooky season. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see anything in further detail, and perhaps I'll make another video showing that better. Stay tuned and subscribe for the next installment, which will show a little bit of an interior going on. Hope to see you all again soon, and I hope you've enjoyed my video.